Hello, people of the internet, and welcome to the third installment of our look at the history of Godzilla in animation. I'm your host, Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir, and here with me is, of course, Matt Denian.
Hey, everybody. Pleasure to continue on this animated journey with you through Godzilla.
And so, what are we going to be looking at this time, Matt?
Definitely the most unique Godzilla animation of what we've looked at so far in Godzillaland.
Yes, Godzilland, or Godzilland, as it's known in Japan, was a series of OVAs, or direct-to-video animations in Japan, released on VHS in both 1994 and 1996 by a company called Gakken. There was originally an educational TV series also called Godzilland, where it was mostly live-action segments with kids and young adults learning about certain subjects that's loosely connected to Godzilla while also promoting the latest Godzilla film at the time. And eventually, from 1993, it spun off into a short educational anime series, where within the original TV series, it was mostly live action with very brief animated segments of chibi Godzilla and chibi versions of the rest of the monsters, and they would use these animations as like transitions between segments or commercials. And so they decided to take these character designs and eventually just give them its own full-on animated miniseries on VHS, where they go over the four main subjects. The first two that were released in 94 focused on the hiragana alphabet and counting. Meanwhile, the next two animated releases focused on addition and subtraction. It should be noted that the second two episodes actually featured live action segments to bookend each episode, where it featured a live-action adult Godzilla living in a cabin somewhere with some human girl whose relationship is never really expounded upon, except apparently, according to Gojipedia, this young human girl is his sister of some kind. And he just they would be, living in the cabin, and he would say, "Oh, this reminds me of this time when I was a child on Godzilland," and then he proceeds to tell a story related to the subject that he and the human character girl were talking about. And so each episode kind of follows a bit of a formula where there's a bit of story followed by the Godzilla and the rest of his kaiju friends learning about either the alphabet or numbers or math, and eventually using that knowledge that they recently learned in order to overcome a particular problem of theirs. So for years, please ignore that siren in the background, fellas. It's nothing to be worried about. So it's kind of strange because for years people have been wondering why there has never been a Godzilla anime before, because us Westerners, we love anime and we tend to perceive anime as nothing but unadulterated violence, because back in the 80s and 90s a lot of the anime that we got on VHS were very, very violent programs or violent pieces of media, and so people often assume that majority of Japanese animation is nothing but action and violence, where it's like Dragon Ball Z or Devilman or Pokemon, anything like that. But, however, anime comes in all shapes and sizes, and little did people know there actually was a Godzilla anime, and this was it. And it's perhaps like the least likely execution any Westerner could have thought of when it came to a Godzilla anime. So, what was your initial reaction upon learning of the existence of Godzilland, Matt?
I was surprised, as you said, that this was the first anime Godzilla in Japan. To first consider that there was an entire U.S. series that we already covered by Hanna-Barbera prior to this, and that this was the first time that Godzilla was animated in any form in Japan. Knowing, as an American, I do have limited knowledge, especially when I was younger, about the way that Japanese culture works. But in the U.S., a lot of times a profitable live action series will get some type of an animated spin-off. For instance, like the real Ghostbusters, was something that quickly went to animation, but still was kind of in the same vein as the live action version. I mean, the Ghostbusters, for instance, is a little bit more kid friendly, but in this case, they really took it to like a preschool level.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it should be noted that we are not the target demographic of this program.
No, not at all. So I did, because you sent me a few links, watch this with my kids, in particular my 4-year-old and my 8-year-old, and they had some interesting observations about it, especially when comparing it to shows that are perhaps more familiar here in the U.S. So
something like Sesame Street or Blue's Clues or Dora the Explorer.
Yes, exactly. In fact, the opening segments, as you had mentioned, where it's Godzilla and the woman who's kind of like his sister, is most comparable, I think, to the Good Night Show on the Sprout Network. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not at all.
Unfortunately, I am not.
Well, it's got a host with a little stuffed star who kind of work as like the two people who introduce the next cartoon that's coming up, and they'll do some kind of like a little skit that leads into that. By the way, for any dads out there that know what I'm talking about, watching Nina, I bet it's a good night. Just saying, Andre, it's worth checking out for your time. Okay, Nina from the Good Night Show, mark it down.
I'm looking at screen Google Images here, and you know what? The setup reminds me a lot of this show called The Big Comfy Couch. Do you remember that one?
No, I don't remember that, but okay. I would imagine it's probably the same. Yeah.
It's like a clown, a girl who has this like clown doll, and it's alive, and they both interact with each other, and they have a big giant couch, and the majority of the show takes place on that couch.
Okay. Yeah. I can picture it now. Yeah.
And I assume this is like a formula that is quite common with a lot of children's young children's programming, where it's like characters who are talking about something and then saying, hey, this reminds me of this one adventure I had, and then have a transition into the episode itself before coming back and rounding it out. In fact, I just realized this is the format for the Super Mario Brothers Super Show.
Yes, that's another good example of it, where it's the same type of thing. Absolutely. That's probably even a better connection because it's the same characters there.
And I like how they use the explanation of, like, they try to connect this into like what we mainly think of Godzilla by saying, oh, this is Godzilla's childhood days. And I have a feeling that making like baby versions or a younger baby version of a pre-existing character, that is something I have seen a lot. What comes to mind the most is like Baby Looney Tunes. And
Muppet Babies.
Muppet Babies, yeah, that's another one. Or I think even there was a Felix the Cat anime series called Baby Felix. So it's like, hey, checking out the younger days. And looking at it, it does make a sense to some degree because, like, I guess there's no, back in the Heisei era, this was like the middle, because technically we are within this is the last year of the Heisei era.
Right.
But when I say Heisei era, I'm referring to like the 80s, 90s movies. Like, this is near like the middle to tail end of the Heisei era of Godzilla movies. And so there wasn't really a need to make an action-based anime off of Godzilla, because if you want action, just watch the movies. I guess that's probably what Toho was thinking. So they thought, oh, let's just appeal to kids, because kids are sure as hell not going to, or little kids, because they're probably not too young to watch these movies, so let's extend our brand further by making a younger, more child-friendly version of Godzilla, and let's try to teach them, because that stuff has worked out for other people.
Right, but one thing that confused me about this is the live-action version of Godzilla that's in that kind of house you'd spoken about with his human sister, is the Godzilla from like Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla 2, which isn't the most kid-friendly version of Godzilla. I was a little surprised they didn't go with something more akin to like Godzilla versus Megalon look, where it's more accessible. They use one of the more scary versions of Godzilla to do these intros.
I guess so, yeah. Which makes it all the more hilarious as an adult, seeing like this version of the Godzilla suit like jumping around and dancing during the music video portions of this show.
Right, they do portray it very kid friendly. It's just the look of it. I wouldn't think that if you're watching Sesame Street, they'd have something like
Big
the
Bird.
Gappa from have Big Bird replaced with the Gappa from the Gappa movie. It's kind of like a similar comparison to where they're going to be introducing it with this kind of scary looking monster to these really really preschool type shows.
Yeah. It's like, what's the letter of today, Gappa?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it is quite a bizarre setup, but maybe because this is a VHS release and not a full-on television series, maybe they were perhaps limited in their resources. I mean, even if you were to look at the animation itself, it's pretty low budget. They made, what's funny enough, I think the backgrounds for the first two installments, which was the hiragana and counting episodes, do look much more detailed than the backgrounds we see in the later portions of the addition and subtraction episodes. And on top of that, the character designs themselves are super simplistic to the point where like there is almost no detail on them. Everyone has the same shared the same eyes. There is also very limited actual animation whenever characters walk or move. Every action is done within like 2 or 3 frames. I think, again, going back to the first 2 episodes, I think there was actually, like, perhaps more animation, like this one little instance where Godzilla sees, like, a lump of sand on the beach, and the lump of sand is moving around the beach, so he's trying to chase after it. That's probably, like, the most complex the animation gets, and we don't really see that level of animation for the next 2 segments, which tells me that maybe the live-action portions were there to save the cost of animation and pad out the episodes.
Oh, okay. Because let's say not in terms of tone, but I think in level of animation, it's kind of reminds me of like early South Park, where like the backgrounds are pretty much the same, the characters all move the same, they all look pretty much the same, minus 1 or 2 minor details, right?
Yeah. And it's kind of crazy looking at Mechagodzilla because he's like the most detailed out of all of them, which makes me think that somebody who worked on the show was a bigger fan of Mechagodzilla and was probably more biased towards him.
Right. And what's interesting about this series, though, is a lot of the monsters from the Godzilla series do appear in it.
Yeah. It's very interesting seeing everyone's getting chibi-fied like portrayal. I'm surprised they gave Baragon as big of a role in this show as well, because like, go ahead.
Right, I was gonna say because at this point his only appearance was Frankenstein versus Baragon, and then a very brief cameo in Destroy All Monsters. But he's featured fairly prominently in this. This is way before GMK.
Yeah, same thing goes for Mogira, because this was made in 1994, so Mogira did appear in Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, so I guess there was a need to bring him in here, and it's kind of neat that they design him. Pretty much like everyone's designs are based off of their Showa incarnations. Within the original live-action TV series, whenever you would see Chibi Mechagodzilla, it's based off of the Heisei version, and it's really hilarious because he looks like way too detailed and sticks out from the rest of the other character designs. But here it's the Showa version of Mechagodzilla. As for our cast of monsters, we have Godzilla, we have Anguirus, Baragon, Rodan, Mothra, Larva Mothra. Even though in one of the music videos we see 2 baby Mothras, for the most part we usually only see 1 baby Mothra. And then we have Mogira and King Ghidorah, Mogira, King Ghidorah, and Gigan. King Ghidorah has an appearance within the first 2 episodes, but is strangely absent for the next 2, except outside of like transitions. Meanwhile, Mogira and Gigan are never given anything to do outside of like, again, transitions. So I thought it was kind of odd to see them appear in this show and not have any real role in these little stories. And finally, go ahead.
Well, Oh, no, you're going to get to it. Finally, I was going to say, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. And finally, we have, of course, this being children's programming. And whenever we have children's programming, we usually have like a female clone of the main character. Kind of like what one individual, I believe her name, Lindsay Ellis. She used to be the nostalgia critic. She named this the Smurfette principle, where you have the token female character of the gang. And because we already have Mothra serving a different role in this show, we have Godzilland, or as the subtitles call her, Godzilla, which is a pink female Godzilla who's kind of like a bit of like Godzilla's love interest for this miniseries, and to date has only appeared in this collection of educational shorts. There has been fan art of an adult Godzilland in the years since. People found out about this, most notably one version created by Matt Frank himself. Outside of that, this is her only official appearance.
Right, and what she looks like is just like Godzilla, except she's pink, and she seems to have like heart-shaped spines going down her back instead of the Godzilla-type spines.
Which I thought was like a cute little addition there.
Yeah.
So what did you think of these cast of characters?
Well, it's interesting in that when I was watching it, and my kids thought the same thing too, that the formula that the shows kind of follow is similar to now, which is the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, which I'm sure you probably haven't seen either. But
I am familiar with the CG show, right?
Yes.
Okay, I never watched it, but I have seen like commercials of it. Back in high school. Right,
and these characters seem to fill the same role as that. So in the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, and again, I have 2 young kids, that's why I know these things. But
you're hip
anyway,
with the kids.
Yeah, I'm down, man. But anyway, you have obviously Mickey and Minnie, whereas Godzilla and Godzilla filling those types of roles, and then the other characters round him out with like Goofy and Donald and Pluto and whatever else. You have Anguirus and Baragon and such. But what's interesting is you have the Pete character, Pete, who's like the big fat cat. You might know him from in the Mickey Mouse Christmas Carol. He plays the Ghost of Christmas Future. Mm-hmm. He's not necessarily like evil, if you will, but he's sort of like an antagonist where he'll set up problems that the characters have to solve to get to the end of their story, which is basically the role that Mechagodzilla fills in this series.
Yeah, which I thought was perfect.
Yeah. So Mechagodzilla's not like evil. He'll just like decide he wants to play with Anguirus and nobody else can. So in order to save him, if you will, from Mechagodzilla, Mechagodzilla will ask Godzilla and Godzilla and Rodan or whoever some basic arithmetic problems or something along those lines, where they do it kind of like a game show even. And if they solve them, then they rescue Anguirus from Mechagodzilla.
Yeah, and I find this version of Mechagodzilla to be absolutely adorable, because I like the idea where he's not a straight-up bully like Pete, but rather he is a misunderstood misfit who simply does not know how to properly communicate with other kids. And I love how they don't, the Godzilla gang, they don't really demonize him. Rather, they're more welcome to show him the right way of being friends with other people. Even if he makes the same mistake again in the next episode, they're willing to give him another chance. And I found that to be very adorable. And actually, it made Mechagodzilla a very sympathetic character. You know, he's a robot. He's not probably not programmed to know how to socially interact with people. So he has good intentions, but he comes off as a bit forceful, to the point where he scares other people, which makes him desperate and attempts to kidnap characters in order to make them his friends. So
right,
yeah.
I was going to say, I think the message there is pretty good, because they will make Godzilla and Anguirus and such will make comments about, your AI, his Mechagodzilla's artificial intelligence, can't quite understand what he's doing wrong in a given situation. So I think it's kind of like a veiled message for perhaps a kid who comes from a different culture or something into a new culture. And the kid's not being difficult, especially because he's very young. He's just not used to the norms of the new culture he's in. So instead of demonizing Mechagodzilla in this case, they do kind of try to show him how to better interact with the other monsters on the island. So I think that's kind of like a good veiled social message that comes through in the story.
And I do like how they brought in Mothra into the picture as well, where adult Mothra is portrayed as more like this like motherly figure. She oversees the activities of everyone else. It's kind of hard to tell, but it was through her actions, because her voice is just as high pitched as everyone else. But it was through her actions and her more mature demeanor, it made me think that she was more of like a caretaker for the majority of these monsters, as well as the peacekeeper, which fits very much so in line with how she is portrayed in the movies, if she was anthropomorphized.
Right, right. And one other interesting thing about this series that I liked, that I haven't seen in a lot of American kid-based educational programs like this, is that they'll take an issue, for instance, they do one where it's subtraction, and they'll give multiple examples of how subtraction can work and different ways it can be thought of, as opposed to just like counting backwards. So, for instance, they'll do something where you have, they did one episode where Godzilla had like 5 apples, and he's saying to Godzilla, well, if you eat 2 of these apples, how many would be left for me? So it's a very basic, obviously you would set up the subtraction, we have 5, take away 2, and they'll show that example. But then they'll do another one in that same episode where Godzilla likes plants, and each day Godzilla puts more plants in her room for when she wakes up. And what they do then is they do subtraction by kind of looking at, okay, I had 2 to begin with, now I have 5. How do I realize how many more did I gain overnight? So they'll subtract the 2 from the 5, kind of like, going backwards. Which as a teacher, I thought was kind of cool. That they're like, okay, we're approaching this in a different way and showing how we can almost use subtraction to check itself, or like, backwards addition. And that kind of lays the groundwork for things like algebra later on. But I thought it was very cool that they introduced it that way. I don't think you'd see that in too many Western cartoons. They might just basically do the I have 5, take away 2 type of thing.
Right. I was very surprised by how they managed subtraction, because you're right. I was expecting more of like the I have 5 apples, I ate 2, how many do I have left? But rather it's like you're not taking away, rather you're adding more, but you're seeing how many more were added after, before the fact. I was surprised because I don't think even in my time in elementary school we were ever taught math that way, and I feel like it's a much more practical sense, I believe.
What you're looking at there is, Andres and I are both teachers, for everybody listening, so this is why we have some kind of a grasp of this, is as opposed to teaching the skill in a rote memorization form, is a practical application of the skill. I feel like in that sense, which is very cool.
Yeah, and I don't think I feel like with the American educational system in general, I feel like they don't really give you much of many opportunities to show you how you can apply a lot of this knowledge in a practical sense. Rather, it's just memorize all these facts and you'll get a degree so you can move on to the next level. Just memorizing stuff with no context.
Right, and particularly when you think that this was introduced in the early 90s, there was nothing in the American Western civilization at that time that I know of that was doing education in that manner. So,
let's see. And then as for the counting episodes, it's not these were the first 2 episodes, and you can really tell they were struggling to come up with some form of narrative, because with the counting episode, you start off with a cute little story where Anguirus is preparing a birthday. I believe it was Godzilla's birthday party, and he didn't bring enough cake for everybody because he didn't count correctly the number of people that would show up, nor the number of heads that need feeding in the case of King Ghidorah. So that leads to them having a bunch of accounting exercise. And then there's another story where Godzilla and was it Baragon or Anguirus who are having that who can collect the most nuts.
I think it was, I want to say that was apples too for Godzilla's birthday, maybe.
Right.
And they all kept trying to one up the other one, but then they would count and sort of subtract there too to see who had more. It was kind of neat to do it that way.
Right. Oh, but that was the subtraction episode. I'm talking about the counting episode.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking of something else. Yeah. Sorry.
But there was a competition to see who can collect the most nuts, and so then they count up how many each character got. And then they started playing a bunch of games where they just several games where King Ghidorah would assign a number to each character. So when he says the number, then the character responds to it. So it's like.
I had a question for you. Sorry to sidetrack about the educational steps that they used. So we didn't watch this episode, but in the beginning, there's clearly a scene where Godzilla is driving like a train, and they're collecting letters, but they're definitely letters from like the alphabet that Western civilization would utilize. Is that something that they do teach in Japan early? Because writing there doesn't use like an alphabet, correct? It uses a symbol system.
Right. They use the hiragana and katakana system, but they teach the hiragana first. Because that is like the main alphabet. But for when it comes to the English alphabet, or Romaji as they refer to it in Japanese, they don't learn Romaji until they are well into elementary school, from what I've been told, which I think is very backwards, because I'm thinking, how can you learn English at a young age before even starting with the alphabet?
Okay, so maybe they're just introducing the letters there? I'm just wondering on the side as a teacher.
Probably, yeah, because to let everyone know, half these episodes were subtitled online, leaving only the last 2 episodes were subtitled online, which is the addition and subtraction. Meanwhile, the first 2 episodes, which was the counting and hiragana episodes, they were not subtitled. And with the counting episodes, it's instead of having one story. Well, I guess like the addition was one story, the subtraction was like 2 or 3 stories, the counting was also like 2 or 3 stories, but they don't really have any theme to connect them outside of counting. And then finally the hiragana, there was like one little story at the beginning where Mothra is having a party. It's usually parties and eating with these characters, but then again, that's Japanese society as well. It's like, they invite people to come over somewhere to eat, basically. They go on vacation just so they can find a new place to eat and check out new food to eat. That's basically, it's like, to quote Jim Gaffigan's joke, it's like vacationing is just an excuse to go somewhere you've never eaten at before. So Mothra's having a party, and Godzilla accidentally has a misunderstanding because he didn't read his invitation properly, which leads them to learn the hiragana alphabet. And then the majority of the episode, they kind of abandon the story because it's just the characters going over every single symbol in the hiragana alphabet and then finding a word that begins with that hiragana or a word that has the hiragana within it. Kind of like what we do with alphabets, where it's like A, apple, B, bat, C, cat, D, dog, basically that sort of thing. And it's a game that even I play with my students when I go through alphabet exercises with them.
Okay. One other thing I was wondering about this series is, when did this come out in relation to Pokemon? Because I feel like some of the monsters are drawn in a very Pokemon-like way. Like, it seemed... Like, I know in the U.S. Pokemon came out, I want to say maybe shortly after this, 96, I think, was the first one that popped up here.
The original Pokemon Red and Green versions came out in Japan on February 27th, 1996. So this was right before the last 2 episodes of Godzilland.
Oh, okay, because... I'm not very Pokemon familiar, but my kids are pointing out that, like, Mothra, for instance, looks just like, I want to say, Butterfree, they were saying.
That is
in this
true.
Series, maybe?
Yeah, okay. That is true, and it's funny. Although, this Mothra did appear in the earlier episodes from 94, so I would say probably was just a coincidence for these 2 characters to look similar.
Okay, and obviously, like, Godzilla has... similar appearance to Charmander, being that this is like a chibi Godzilla, right? Right,
yeah. I do see that. They have a lot of the more cuter designed Pokemon. They all kind of have like that very squat, stubby designs to all of them.
Right.
Yeah, and let's see. So, what exactly were your kids' experience or thoughts upon seeing an educational program made for kids around their age for in a different language?
Oh, well, it was interesting for the 2 of them. My youngest daughter liked that she was seeing like a cute Godzilla, she said, running around. Oh, she likes scary stuff too. Like she loves Kong Skull Island, for instance, and she's 4. So I don't know if it's good or bad parenting on my part, but she loves that kind of stuff. And
at least you're raising a much braver kid than most others would.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
she's not afraid of anything.
I bet you, like, there's going to be, like, at one point, there's going to be, like, a Michael Myers haunted house. All her friends would be scared to go in, and she's like, yeah! And she'll charge head first. Woo!
Yeah, she'll be there one day. Just a side note. She loves sharks, and she wanted to watch, like, The Shallows with me the other day. I'm like, no, we cannot watch The Shallows. That's too scary for you still. However, don't surf alone. But anyway, she liked it for that aspect. Now, obviously, it was difficult for her to follow because it's in a different language. My older daughter, my 8-year-old, she loves Pokemon. So she liked that they kind of looked like Pokemon, she had stated. She also liked being able to look at what they were saying and then read the subtitles too. It was kind of neat for her to try to pick up on maybe certain words meant this or that. So she got, for instance, that Godzilla is Gojira. You know what I mean? Because she would see it like in that type of sense. So she thought that was kind of cool to go about it that way. And she's also the one who pointed out the similarities between the Goodnight Show and then the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, was like, oh, well, they're all kind of like friends. And I guess Godzilla's like the Japanese Mickey Mouse, which I think you've kind of used too before as maybe an explanation in previous recordings we've done, or this recording, about how Mickey Mouse and Godzilla are similar. And then Godzilla is like that Minnie Mouse type of role.
Right. Yeah. And I do like how Godzilla is kind of like your typical acts like a typical young Japanese male protagonist, where he's very strong, he's very friendly, he's a little slow and dim-witted in certain instances, but he always keeps his chin up and is willing to press on forward.
Yes.
Yeah, and I also like how it was very cute with his interaction with Anguirus in the Edition episode, where they have a fight. We don't really know what started the fight, but then again, that's kind of how these sort of things happen in real life with kids. They get in a fight and they apologize when they just forget about it and move on.
Yeah.
And also like another moment I always liked was the Ghidorah heads actually act as individuals, and they often argue with each other over who would eat this like piece of cake. Or this one portion where Godzilla and I think Anguirus were having a competition. The left head roots for one monster, the right head roots for the other monster. They're both angrily looking at the center head, and he says, "Go whoever wins."
It's kind of like the two-headed monster from Sesame Street, where it's each head has its own personality.
Yeah. Of course, we've never seen that at all with Ghidorah in the past.
Yeah.
Let's see. I know, like, the Anguirus, he's kind of like this, he's the best friend, and so I like how he is kind of like the one who often gets a bit screwed over in the end, kind of like in the movies, where I remember when Godzilla is rescued, she hugs Godzilla. Meanwhile, there's this brilliant awkward pause where Anguirus is like, I helped out too, you know.
Yeah, that was pretty funny, actually.
or like there's a part where Godzilla, Mothra, and Baragon are on their way to rescue Anguirus, and then they get distracted by having fun in the water. Meanwhile, there's again that nice humorous pause, before Mothra says, I hope they realize that they need to save Anguirus.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are very amusing bits of humor here that even I found to be very enjoyable. And it's also it's very charming to see like this sort of take on Godzilla. But then again, I'm someone who grew up on this sort of programming, and so not only is it very quaint, I guess, and novel, there's a bit of sense of novelty to seeing Godzilla and his friends act this way, act like people, and seeing how they would interact if they were more anthropomorphized. I'm sure there are plenty of people actually who has done so, where they would make little pieces of comedic art, depicting these characters living like humans. I know there was this a series of 4 panel comics that my friend Raptor Gear makes, featuring Gigan and Megalon as like buddies, and they would often like sit on a couch, watch TV, and just like commentate over stupid things that they watch on TV or get into arguments with each other. And it's very funny because you would imagine those two, based on their movie, to act like best friends who would get into heated arguments.
Right. In fact, one thing I did think about, because they're so anthropomorphized in this, is something that can relate to you and I. Down the road, I think would be fun for us to do as an offshoot, would be a buddy cop comedy with Draco's Little Atomic Rex, sort of like in the when we're doing our noir reviews where they're like detectives. I thought that might be kind of fun.
Like,
struck me.
Like, imagine it was like Magnum PI, but with like Draco Azul and Atomic Rex. You know, it's like Draco Azul, he's got like the Hawaiian shirt. Meanwhile, like, or maybe it could be like a Miami Vice. So it's like one guy's got like the nice white suit. The other guy's got the Hawaiian shirt. You know, they're driving some cool sports car while some funky rock music plays in the background. Bow down, down, bow, tick it down, tick it down, 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 down.
I love it. We got to make it happen down the line.
Oh, this also reminds me of one of my favorite anthropomorphized moments where they actually did do that. It was like Magnum Godzilla, Magnum GI. See, where it was a Magnum PI version of Godzilla and Anguirus as like 70s 80s Miami detectives. It was amazing, and it was made by, I think the name of the artist was Dr. Buffalo on DeviantArt. I'm not sure how many people know much about Dr. Buffalo, but he did a lot of great Godzilla parody art, as well as Transformers parody art, and he even did this one bit of fan art that people caught on to, where he did like a pitch for an animated Godzilla series called Godzilla All Monsters Attack, where it was kind of like Godzilla but with like the art style of Transformers animated. And yeah, as a fan of Transformers Animated and its art style, I really dug his pitch, and he had like this idea for each of the monsters. And in fact, you can't see this, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm about to share the Magnum GI, or no, it's called Godzilla PI.
Oh, nice.
Fan art.
Yeah.
They can solve every crime in the city if they don't smash it first. But yeah,
I like that you've got Godzilla and Anguirus with Hawaiian shirts on and their spikes poking through it. It's very cool.
Yeah. So the idea of anthropomorphizing Godzilla is something that has been very appealing to a number of creators over the years. And this is kind of like one of the few official times we see that sort of thing. And it's very interesting to see how they translate this for smaller children. And it looks like your kids also saw the appeal of seeing a talking, talking humanized versions of these monsters that they like. And by the way, I just shared you another piece of art.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
I was going to say, one thing I do appreciate about the Godzillaland series is, for any fan base that you want to continue, you need to have it accessible for multiple levels. Like we've talked before, I know you and I have a great appreciation for Batman 66. Not everybody does, but it's a great way for young kids to be introduced to Batman without being scared, and having it being accessible for them. Godzillaland is clearly even for like a much younger audience than that, but it is a neat, perhaps first introduction for a preschooler to Godzilla to then kind of grow up in the genre,
Oh yeah, definitely. So let's see, is there anything else worth mentioning before we wrap things up? I will say that I wish that I do like the idea that these are like flashbacks of Godzilla's childhood, and I do like the live action bits are amusing, even though we don't know what exactly the relationship is with these with the human girl and Godzilla. Although, according to the unofficial Gojipedia, she is like his sister of some kind, somehow. But I do like how it's very funny seeing Godzilla as this kind of like kooky, somewhat socially awkward guy. who has a very hungry appetite, just like his younger self, and is often reminiscing over his childhood days. And it's funny how they try to fit in where like Godzilla is now, where it's like, oh, do you talk to her? Do you talk to her? Oh, it's embarrassing, but yeah, I still know her nowadays. And it looks like he's very embarrassed that nothing ever happened between him and Godzilla. So it's kind of interesting that they would go that direction, where here's an adult who is reminiscing over his first crush that he never got to be with in the end. It's like, okay, yeah, that's somewhat interesting.
It is. Now, what do you think about giving this a star rating, the series?
It'd be very difficult, but I guess rating this as an educational series, I feel like this does succeed for the most part. It feels like there are a few kinks here and there in terms of like the technical presentation and the inconsistent styles, and I feel like had this been an actual TV show, this would have had room to grow and develop and become its own thing. But as it is now, it looks like they were never able to take it farther than just these 4 episodes. But as it is now, it's a little bit inconsistent. But overall, I think the series works at being an introduction to kids to these characters and providing them practical means of the basics of math and writing. So yeah, I guess I wouldn't give it a 5, but probably maybe a 4 in terms of its educational value and its appeal towards kids who are into giant monsters.
Yeah, I would concur. Again, as an educator, I think it did a pretty good job, so I would give this a 4 out of 5. I can't say other than as a curiosity, it's worth it for the average Godzilla fan to check out. Like, I don't think it's worth, you can find the episodes on YouTube. It's not worth going out of your way to track down, though. What do you think?
Let's see. If you're not within the target demographic, I would not really strongly recommend this. Unless you're someone like us who are who wish to see everything and anything Godzilla related. But people who are not into this like cutesy chibi thing, who prefer a more badass take on Godzilla, wait for when Godzilla Planet of the Monsters comes out on Netflix, and then you can judge it. Or who knows, that maybe by the time this video is uploaded, it's already released. It's not something I would recommend, but unless you're someone who wants to see this out for the sake of seeing it, it may be worth your time. And yeah.
I was going to say, I was a little surprised, and maybe there is, I don't know about it, that there's not a toy line to accompany this series, because I feel like it might have sold pretty good. Like, chibi things usually sell pretty good, right? And these are kind of like cutesy versions of the characters. What do you think?
Well, I think there's already a lot of chibi Godzilla merchandise available. I mean, like, for Christmas, I ended up getting a chibi Godzilla in the style of that waving cat, Japanese cat.
Okay.
I got a keychain of that chibi figure for my sister because she's into those cats. So there's a ton of chibi material already available. I mean, heck, the keychain charm for my cell phone right here is of Chibi Heisei Godzilla about to bite the arm off of Eva Unit 1 as an official Godzilla vs. Evangelion merchandise. So
sweet.
It is all over the place, so I guess there's no real need for merchandise off of this. Although, if you were to type in Godzilland or Godzilland Rando on Google Images, you might see some books, maybe some like crayon coloring books or some educational books that feature these designs. So I think these characters may have been around solely for educational purposes. Outside of that, I guess they already got things covered on the merchandise end.
Okay. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, but it would have been nice to have seen these characters maybe represented through like a plushie of some kind, something more appropriate for kids, as opposed to tiny little figures that young kids could choke on.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. But then again, maybe it could all come down to budget, but who knows what Toho was thinking when they did this little side project of theirs while they were making their big budgeted movies. Unless there's someone out there who has more information on this series, we'd love to hear more about it. If you know more about it, or if you've seen the show and you'd like to share with us your opinions, let us know in the comments below. So, what exactly are we going to check out next time, Matt?
Next time we'll be checking out Godzilla the series, which is the animated series which followed the 1998 movie.
Yep, the only thing that ever came out of that partnership between Toho and TriStar.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, as always, I have been Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir.
And I've been Matthew Denyon.
And until next time, everybody, take care.